While forgiveness may not be a topic we're all crazy about, it is very vital to our spiritual growth. It tends to stir a little debate, though, even among Christians, sadly. And that's because some Christians mistakenly contend that we don't really have an obligation to forgive. They think that it's not a commandment, nor is it something Jesus orders us to do. And then, of course, other Christians highly regard forgiveness as one of the fundamental teachings of Christianity. So which do we believe? Well, as with everything else, we should look no further than the Bible to be the final authority on the subject. In Old Testament times, it was an eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, and the only exceptions could be made by God or by one of the wise kings or judges whom God appointed. It wasn't until later in the New Testament that we see Jesus coming forth with lessons for everyone on forgiveness. The first and most profound instance of this is when he dispensed forgiveness to the woman who was caught in the sin of adultery. She was guilty as charged, and even while she sat in the circle of her accusers, waiting to be publicly executed by stoning, as was the prescribed punishment, Jesus made a statement to all who were present, and really to anyone reading this passage. He said, "If there be any among you who is without sin, let him cast the first stone." And not one of them cast a stone at her, because Jesus' words served to put them on notice for their hypocrisy. But he also revealed a truth, and that is that we should be willing to forgive others just as God has forgiven us. Jesus later revisited this truth when he told the parable of the wicked servant. There was a servant who owed the king a substantial amount of money, but always made excuses for not repaying. He was finally put in shackles and brought before the king for sentencing. He and his wife and all their daughters and sons were to be sold as slaves, and that money used to pay back the king. But the servant raised his voice and cried loudly for the king to show mercy and give him more time to pay off the debt. Well, the king was moved with compassion and decided to forgive him the debt altogether. The servant was extremely grateful and allowed to go free. But while on the way home, he encountered a man who owed him a large debt, which was long overdue. So he seized him, grabbed him by the throat, and angrily demanded that the debt be paid at once. The debtor begged him in tears for more time, but the wicked servant refused to grant more time and had the man tossed into debtor's prison. Now the king's soldiers happened to witness the whole incident and marveled. "Is not this the same servant who just had his debt erased by the king and was graciously spared from having to sell his whole family into slavery?" So the soldiers reported this back to the king, who became irate and had the man seized again. And the king reasoned with the man, "Shouldn't you have forgiven this debtor and shown mercy just as I showed you today? Now you will be cast into a dungeon." Matthew 18:21-35. So here in this parable, we see the truth about forgiveness resurfacing again. We should be willing to forgive others just as God has forgiven us. No, it's not a commandment. It's not something we're specifically ordered to do. But in all of his messages, stories, and parables, Jesus makes a very strong case for forgiveness. He makes an appeal to reason. It's even built into the Lord's Prayer, which Jesus taught us to pray. "Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us." Once again, a correlation between releasing forgiveness and being forgiven ourselves. There are many sins we commit in the course of a day, sometimes unrepentantly before the Lord. But we make excuses for ourselves, and we fully expect God to understand our circumstances and continue to show us his patience, goodness, and forgiveness. But when it comes to others, however, we become just like that wicked servant who egregiously withholds forgiveness and mercy and demands immediate payback. So I think forgiveness really boils down to this. Being able to step out of hypocrisy and acknowledge that it's not right to withhold forgiveness for trespasses committed against us, while we go on trespassing against God and enjoying the riches of His mercy and forgiveness toward us. In fact, it's dangerous. Consider the warning Jesus gives us in Matthew 7, verse 2. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. So in summary, forgiveness is not a commandment, but a choice, and hopefully a choice that we make in order that God's goodness toward us may continue.